All right, welcome everyone. My name is Malferon, and here we're going to be talking about why you should be playing Sapphire Steel in Set 11, Disney Lorcana's Winterspell. So I did my first video kind of covering the spectrum of Sapphire Steel back in Whispers in the Well, Set 10, and I enjoyed doing it so much that I wanted to continue this series. And the purpose of this series is to give a primer on what can this color combo do. The purpose of a video like this is how can we get people excited to play Sapphire Steel. And so of course, to start all of my videos, right, we are going to begin with an outline. And in today's video, I want to do a primer on a kind of like very basic top-down level, right, of why you should play Sapphire Steel. And from there, we'll go into terminology. This is things that these are terms I'm going to be using throughout the video that players that are not super familiar with card games they might be a little foreign to you. So I want to make sure that we're all speaking the same language here, right? Cover some core concepts that you really need to begin thinking about and sort of ruminating on when you enter a deck like Sapphire Steel. We're going to go over some very basic deck building tips that so you can take sort of the list that you see here and how do you like extrapolate that and make a list of your own, right? And then we will of course cover all the different deck lists that I want to feature today. Now the purpose of if you are mostly here for the deck lists and wanting to just see kind of like what I'm putting out there and different styles and maybe like starting lists for major meta builds, right? There's going to be shortcuts in the YouTube below, right? You could go down, you can click that. That way, everyone's kind of getting what they need. If you want to, venture around to more the specific areas talking about, core concepts and such, you can also use these shortcuts as well. But, if you're, new to Lorcana, new to Sapphire Steel, or really just wanting like a big refresh primer on this stuff, I would highly recommend watching the whole video. I'm going to be covering a lot. So, and then we'll, end with a conclusion. Excellent, excellent. So let's dive right in here. And we have this beautiful Moana Curious Explorer, which is one of the new Sapphire Legendaries coming in set 11. And this is also one of the new Iconics, one of the two Iconics. So beautiful card. So why Sapphire Steel? Why would you pick this color combo other than the fact that it's just the best, right? And so, that's a little bit of bias for me. So for Sapphire Steel, probably one of the biggest things that it's had as a claim to fame, and this goes back, from the very beginning, is that Sapphire Steel is a color combo that has really strong removal options, right? And when I say removal, I mean like, the ability to get rid of opponents' characters, right? Opponents' glimmers, without having to challenge, right? Now, the advantage is that Sapphire Steel has like great challengers as well, right? Especially these steel characters. But, it's things like songs, steel songs have been very known to be great ways to efficiently deal with your opponent's board state without having to put your characters in threat of like a challenge, or if they're not exerted, right, you can still deal with them with steel songs. Many steel songs do strong points of damage and allow you to kind of keep going on with your game plan. And then, Sapphire has very unique forms of removal, but very strong forms of removal, right? So they have the ability to just immediately pick a character and ink them, right? Put them right into your opponent's inkwell, sort of as a delete button. And, the options that we have available for that are Hades, Infernal Schemer, and Let It Go, which was announced as a reprint for set 11, Winterspell, right? And so, put all these together, and Sapphire Steel really has awesome tools to deal with a myriad of different opponents, deck styles, and board states. Now, the other really cool thing is that like Sapphire Steel also has access to a whole bunch of different removal options for other things as well, like location removal, item removal, etc., etc. And so that's a pretty unique feature that Sapphire Steel has, is that they really have the tool set to be able to handle almost anything that you'd want to remove. So kind of leading into the second point, there's immense versatility, and there's not like immense versatility in regards to how you can approach problems, right? There's effectively a tool that either Sapphire or Steel has access to handle almost anything you could encounter. But also there's immense versatility in how you approach particular problems even within the same deck, right? And so because they have really great challenge options, really great song options, really great action options, and you never really feel super shoehorned into one specific strategy necessarily. And there's just such a wide variety of different deck styles, of which I hope to kind of at least give a taste of in this video. And I think it has probably some of the most diverse deck styles that you can do within a single color combo. They have really awesome stat lines, right? So Sapphire and Steel are known for just being pretty big, thick bodies. And so their willpowers are high, their strength are high. And so this really makes you like feel like you're deploying strong characters, and which just feels good as a player. The tribals are pretty reasonably supported, right? And so tribals means that like it's kind of like a theme, right? You know, so there's allies, there's heroes, there's detectives, there's items. You know, these are like a lot of different themes that have been tried and you know, gone on to be relatively successful. I will say that like for whatever reason, Ravensburger seems to have a very like a strong fascination with Sapphire Steel, giving them lots of unique and interesting tribals and themed deck styles that have gone through a large variety of true support, right? So like, you know, there was like Inventors, which kind of got like one set of support back in Azurite Sea, but then we never really saw much to follow up on that. Items has really come and gone in regards to how it's well supported in Sapphire Steel. Detectives is the brand new one in set 10, which has been an awesome tribal, which has gotten great support and is really like a brand new deck style that has breathed a lot of life into you know, options for Sapphire Steel. And then you know, Allies has always been very strong, very well supported. Heroes, you know, it kind of depends. It's a little bit harder, but I'd still say like very much is its own unique archetype. And so it's just things like that where you know, many decks are lucky to even have like one supported tribal that like is halfway reasonable, and Sapphire Steel has access to like at least 2, probably you could argue like 3. So I think that's really cool. And then the playstyles are just fun, right? You know, truly like Sapphire Steel feels like you know, whenever you finish a game, it's like, wow, I really deserved the outcome of that. I really like earned that win. And maybe people say that for all color combos, but I truly feel like Sapphire Steel rewards creativity. It really rewards clever gameplay, and you really see like how your deck building comes to manifest. So that's, you know, that's my perspective. So let's go into some terminology, right? This is pretty important. I'm going to try to define these here once, and I probably won't redefine them later on. So I would kind of lock in here, so to say. So one of the most common terminologies you hear me, you will hear me repeat throughout the video is going to be this word ramp, right? And so, you know, ramp is a word that essentially references that you know, a card that allows you to ink an additional time for that turn, right? So Tipo is a perfect example of this. You know, when you play this character, you may put a card from your hand into your ink while face down and exert it. So there's a multitude of cards that allow you to ink additionally, right? Because the rules allows you to ink one inkable card from your hand per turn, but many cards sort of bypass that. And that's a key feature of Sapphire. And it's so it kind of allows you to sort of skip certain turns, right? You can kind of play a 4 or 5 cost character maybe on turn 3, right? When you only should have 3 ink, right? And so that allows really kind of the core gameplay approach of most Sapphire Steel lists, and that's achievable because of ramp. So when I say like, you know, ramp on 2, ramp on 3, that really means like, you know, you are playing a card that allows you to ink multiple times on turn 2 or turn 3, etc., which allows you to make special and unique plays the turn afterwards with more ink. So filter or cycling, right, is a terminology to reference when you are drawing a card and discarding a card, right? So to distinguish itself, it's not draw necessarily, right? Because conventionally, when you are drawing a card, you are actually just gaining a card, right? And so, but filtering specifically is that you are drawing and you are discarding a card. So you're like trading a card, and so it's still valuable, it's still helpful, but it is you know, distinguished from draw, because you do have to think about them differently, right? And so in regards to the health of your hand, etc. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about filtering or cycling. Bombs are referencing really big, high-value characters that have immediate impact on the board state, right? So you have Vincenzo Santorini, you have Hades Infernal Schemer, you have Arthur, and so you know, these are all characters that, you know, really big, really powerful, and they do something to make a big swing on the board. So when I say bombs, that's normally what I'm referencing. And so when I say like on the OTP and OTD, you may see these terms in the video, or like I may like kind of mention like on the play, on the draw. That's simply communicating like on the play is the player who would go first, and on the draw is the player that would be going second, right? So aggro is a terminology referencing when you are the playing a deck style or deck or certain characters that you are trying to quest aggressively, towards that 20 lore that you need to win, right? So you are trying to just push that lore count, which as fast and as efficiently as possible, and you're doing less emphasis on affecting or impacting your opponent's board state, meaning their character counts and all that stuff, because you're just trying to get to that 20, right? And so that's kind of what that terminology like aggro means, is that you're more focused on just really gaining lore, and everything else is sort of secondary. So the concept of curve, right? So a curve means playing on a particular ink line, right? So so a normal curve would be you play a 1-drop on 1, a 2-drop on 2, a 3-drop on 3 ink, a 4-drop on 4 ink, right? And then I may give like a clarifier, right? So a 2-4-6 curve, right? So you're playing a character, or you're playing cards on turn 2 that inks, right? Additionally, ramps you, right? Which then allows you to play a 4-drop next, right? And then maybe that 4-drop like Cinderella, who allows you to ink at the end of your turn, which effectively means that when you play her on 4, you end the turn with 5 ink, and the next turn you can ink to 6 ink, which allows you to play a 6-drop. Thus, like your curve is 2-4-6, right? So when I'm saying like number counts as the video goes on, that's kind of what I'm referencing. And then the concept of tech, right? So a tech card, or when I say the word tech, is communicating a card whose purpose is to address a very specific problem or deal with something uniquely. So like Pluto's an example of this, where when you play other steel characters, you pop items, and so you would want him in a build to specifically have an answer for opponent's items, right? And not many cards can do that, so thus he's a tech card for items. Core concepts, right? So you need to kind of understand like ramp lines, right? So what does it mean to do like a 2-4-6 line versus a 2-4-5-7 line, and versus a 3-5-7 line? Like what does it even look like? When people say this, are they just speaking gibberish, right? So having like a relatively basic understanding of ramp lines, and just the whole concept of playing by skipping turns because you're gaining extra ink, right, is a very, very different way to play Lorcana, and kind of forces like a mind, like a mindset change, right? So hand economy, so the draw engines and how you maintain a healthy hand to continue to do what you want to do, is it's not as simple as playing Amethyst, where you're just playing cards and drawing cards, right? You normally have to really think about how you're trying to set up a healthy hand. So we'll kind of roughly talk about that. There are many draw engines that exist in Steel. They do require a little bit of setup, and they sometimes come at a cost of having like discard some things as well. So drawing and discarding is a major feature of Steel draw, and then drawing in Sapphire usually has a lot of qualifiers, such as needing to ink multiple times, etc., or like gaining advantage by like inking without using your hand, or like getting value from the discard, things like that. So damage removal, right? So in Sapphire and Steel, a lot of your removal is damage based, meaning that like you'll do 1 damage here, 3 damage here, right? Whether through songs or character abilities. And so having like a growing comfort level and understanding of damage thresholds, and when you would need to do certain damage points at certain turns, is a skill you have to kind of grow and learn as you continue to get used to the deck and play in the deck. And then uninkable counts. Sapphire Steel is known for playing some of the highest uninkable counts of many decks, right? And so you get used to playing decks that will have 14 to 17 uninkables, and you could definitely make decks with less than that, but it's a deck color combo that is quite comfortable playing at a high uninkable count. And don't be intimidated if you see deck lists like that. The decks are designed to be able to handle that, because there's a lot of ways to generate a lot of ink to be able to play any uninkable you'd want, or to take an uninkable card and then turn it into ink, or get rid of it in some other way, shape, or fashion, like cycling it, right? So And then, I kind of skipped over this, my apologies. And then singers and songs, right? So like really since the beginning, Sapphire Steel has a strong emphasis on, playing high value songs. Like a lot of your removal options are steel songs. And then, valuing characters as singers, not just as questers or bodies that can challenge as well. So, that's a different mindset as well. Like, how do I think of someone as like, okay, this is someone that I really want to consistently sing songs, or, when I'm trying to set up characters to be able to survive, to be able to sing, right? And that also slows down your lore count. So like, how comfortable are you with that, right? That's also kind of a mindset change to think of characters as primarily singers as opposed to challengers or questers, right? So it's just it's something you need to think about as you're kind of building some decks. So let's give some examples of like ramp lines, right? So like a 2/4/6 line may classically look like this, where maybe you play your 1-drop, maybe not always. Here we're playing like Mulan. You would play either Tipo or Sail, which are your most popular and most well established ramp cards on 2. And then you would play something like Cinderella, right, who allows you to end the turn with 5 ink and then allows you to play a 6-drop the next turn. Or Belle, right? Belle, Snowfield Strategist also allows you, or Snowfight Strategist also allows you to do the same thing, just a little clunkier, right? Because her ability is that any of your characters that are banished, right, get turned into ink. So maybe you play her, maybe you run your Mulan into your opponent's character. She would be banished, go to the discard, and then get turned into ink, right? Which means you end your turn with 5, which allows you to play a 6-drop the next turn. So 2/4/5/7 allows you to, so this is almost exclusively like a way to play with Kita, right? So Kita, Creative Thinker, who you would play on 4, and then, if you exert her, she allows you to ink a card off the top of your deck, right? And but it's exerted, which means that you're committed to playing a 5-cost character that turn, but the following turn you are able to play a 7-drop, right? So here I'm featuring, you would play 5-drop Scuttle, and then you play 7-drop Arthur. 3/5/7 is another classic ramp line, right? And so here, you play your 1-drop, your 2-drop. You would play something like Mickey Mouse, Detective, who when you play him, you ink the top card off the top card off the top of your deck, enter ink while exerted, and then Donald Duck, Focus Flatfoot, who allows you to also ink the top card off the top of your deck, exerted, right? So just by playing them, you're bumping up your ink count, right? And so 3/5/7 lines allow you to try to like contest the board earlier with a really good 2-drop, and then kind of continue to push you on with your 3-drops and your 5-drops, things like that. And then they're kind of designed to get you to these really good 7-drops. That you can play 6-drops just as well, but it really like gives you access to that 7-drop earlier than anticipated. So what are some things you have to think about when you're trying to put together a deck, right? Like, how does one approach deck building in Sapphire Steel? So in my brain, I always kind of break it down into these 5 major points, right? And you kind of answer them from top to bottom. And if you sort of answer these, you'll be able to put together a deck reasonably well. So the number one question you want to answer is, how will you win, right? And so this was a little bit more relevant historically when we had a lot of like really unique and interesting ways to achieve lore, right? So historically there was an item called Lucky Dime where you would exert it and you would just gain the lore of a character, right? So this allowed you to gain lore without questing. But other examples of this is like, well, there's locations, right? So do you kind of want to like mostly gain lore through locations? Do you want to quest like all at once, right? Or do you want to like kind of quest more gradually? And so, kind of how do you envision yourself achieving that 20 lore count, right? And how quickly you'd want to kind of achieve that should be one of the first questions you answer, because that really dictates the rest of the build. The next question you really need to answer is, how are you going to draw, right? So you kind of have to start picking some draw engines to make sure that your deck can maintain healthy hands so you can keep playing cards. And so I would say classically, you want somewhere between 7 to 10 cards that pretty consistently draw, right? Either they get you, a good burst of cards, or they consistently keep getting you more cards. The next question is, do you ramp, right? And so, majority of Sapphire builds, especially Sapphire Steel, will play ramp decks, right, where you're trying to like jump up to higher ink counts, but not all of them, right? And so if you don't really find that interesting or care to do that, that's one of the first things you should answer, because again, it kind of helps inform which build you'd want to do. And if you are going to ramp, what ramp lines interest you the most or kind of fit your playstyle or the deck, right? And so do you want to do 2-4-6? Do you want to do 3-5-7? La da 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 da. And then what is your kind of envisioned curve? What characters do you really want to deploy and play at certain ink counts? And, the characters that you're thinking about, how many of those characters do you need to be able to consistently do that, right? Should you be running 4? Can you get away with 2, et cetera, to keep achieving the curve that you want on the board, right? So let's talk about ramp options, right? So these are all the cards that are currently legal and core constructed, meaning sets 5 through 11, that allow you to ink additionally. This looks like a lot of options, right? Some of these are kind of reaching, right? So some of these like removal cards, like Let It Go, which allows you to ink. It's almost never a situation where you would let it go your own character, right? You want to use that to get rid of opponents' characters, right? It's a removal card, but it is possible. That's why I put it here. So realistically, right? So these are probably the only truly like relevant actual cards that you'd even halfway consider for, the purpose of gaining more ink to play bigger threats for yourself, right? Moana is a little different. So Moana, Curious Explorer, one of the new legendaries coming out, she allows you to ink from the discard. So she technically does not allow you to ink additionally for the turn. So one would argue that she shouldn't be considered ramp. However, she gives you access to cards that you otherwise wouldn't be able to ink, right? And now would more than happily ink every turn from the discard, and maybe like, conserve your hand. So from that perspective, I'm considering her a ramp card, but she's not a very conventional ramp card at all. Just kind of putting that out there. And even like amongst these options, right, these are going to be your most meta relevant cards in the yellow boxes. Some people may argue, One Jump Ahead has a little bit more of a case than like Belle or something, or like, Moana's more build specific and like Princess Cinderella builds. However, I think the large majority of Sapphire players would agree that like, these are kind of the ones you're going to see featured most often in deck styles. Like I'm a big fan of Kita, but I kind of recognize most people have moved away from Kita. And, on the right here with Tipo, Sail, and Cinderella, these are kind of your strongest, biggest, most common Sapphire ramp cards that you'll probably see in almost every Sapphire deck. So what draw options do we have, right? So again, like this list composes every Sapphire and Steel card that is currently core constructed legal that will draw you a card. Now, to be clear, right, I'm not referencing cards. So this references cards that either draw 2 or more cards or can repetitively continue to draw and gain that advantage. It is exempting cards that scry, meaning that like they look for other cards and simply replace themselves. So like Vision of the Future is a good example. You look at the top 5 cards of your deck, you pick one, you put it in your hand. You spent a card, Vision, to reacquire a new card, right? And so that's not draw per se. The amount that you end with is the same. It's just you looked for a new option, right? And so, but I do consider that different from draw. Similarly with like filtering, right? Drawing and discarding, you didn't gain anything per se, right? And so it's a little bit more nuanced than that, but you guys get what I'm saying right now. So these are the only true like what I would consider draw engines. Now of these, right, the only ones that are like even halfway playable, right? Playable meaning that like, that you would ever really consider truly playing them in a very consistent manner, that doesn't feel bad and that could, snowball or continue to gain like strong board states. And then amongst these, right, your like most common draw engines that you will likely see are going to be, Goliath, Jasmine, and then I think most people can agree, even though he hasn't been formally tested yet, that Pete is going to be a very strong mainstay in many Sapphire builds. So, and then what are your removal options? Oh, we got a lot of removal options, I'll tell you what. And so here, right, these are like all the cards in Sapphire and Steel that deal with an opponent's characters. Now, I did not include cards here that deal with enemy locations or items, right? This list would be way too big. It's already big enough. But like this is like, all of them. But in here, right, again, these are going to be your only truly halfway relevant options that people would even remotely consider, right? And amongst these, right, I would argue that these are the only meta relevant ones that you're going to see in like competitive decks, right? Now that doesn't mean you can't use or try the other cards. I mean, like my main build, right, for that I used competitively last set, and I plan to use this set, has the mob song, right? It's a 10 cost uninkable song. But I kind of acknowledge that like things that are, kind of no-brainer options, or, these are like considered the standard foundational removal cards you're going to see in most Sapphire Steel decks, or could easily be splashed into most Sapphire Steel decks, are these cards selected in yellow, with an emphasis on Strength of Raging Fire, Tinkerbell, and Hades. You'll see these cards in almost every Sapphire Steel build, just because they're ubiquitous, they're just strong, and they can operate in any build. You don't necessarily need them in every build, but they can operate in every build. So early game, right? What are some kind of cards you are likely going to see in the early game? Right? So your 1-drops, this is a really good kind of sampling of what your 1-drops will be. Captain Hook to kind of fight aggro cards. Mulan, who can hold her own against aggro and kind of like, stall them a little bit. But really like her biggest benefit is that she helps filter a little bit to make a hand a little bit, make a hand better fit your strategy, get rid of nasty uninkables you don't want, and she's a princess, so she's a really cheap way to trigger a Cinderella to keep ramping. Of course, if you're playing the Jasmine Allies build, you're going to want to be running this 1-drop Jasmine, who functions as a shift target. And then, of course, you have your early ramp cards, right? Like ramping on 2 is what most Sapphire Steel builds want to do if you're playing a ramp build. And so ramping on 3 is definitely less common. Doesn't mean it's not an option, but it's way less common. And then, like a couple other 1-drop options, like Develop Your Brain for scrying, and then Fire the Cannons for some early action pressure. So kind of the next stage of the early game is was what I call the follow-up ramp, right? So how do you kind of catapult yourself to 5 and 6 ink, where many Sapphire Steel builds consider the game truly starting then, right? So Cinderella's clearly going to be your best card. But, if you're running Jasmine allies, of course you want to be able to shift your Jasmine to keep looking for more allies. Pleakley, who allows you to ink a character on your board, really good in Jasmine ally builds, because you can ink the shifted Jasmine for getting 2 ink just from playing that. And then, she was able to get enough value. So Angel is one of the new Steel Legendary cards, so she's not a ramp card. She kind of stands out here. But she is a very valid kind of alternative play line, right, that allows you kind of really stall or disrupt an opponent's board at the price of your hand. So you usually want to follow her up with a draw engine. But, for like really aggressive questing decks, she has definitely earned her place and plays a really cool new role in slowing down other decks while allowing you to kind of build up your big bodies. So your mid game, these are some typical cards you may feature, right? I consider the 5-cost cards in Sapphire Steel as like major tech slots, right? Basically, you pick a 5-cost depending on what you anticipate to see, or what things you want to not lose to or kind of cover, right? Are you going to run into a lot of evasives? Do you want to run some Jasmines? Do you anticipate some items? Run some Plutos or some Donalds. Are you running a princess build, right, with an emphasis on ramping and fine crafting like a perfect hand, right? Moana's and Namari's. Are you running like a kind of a ward heavy build, right? Like Cluck and Scuttle. So there's, of course, Pete's more draw. So there's a lot of things you can think about when you want to, but this is what your mid game will commonly look like. It's followed up by the 6 costs and some of the songs, right? So Ariel, Tinkerbell, Goliath are going to be your sort of very standardized go-to 6 costs. All of these are extremely strong. Tinkerbell and Ariel really kind of like being the cream of the crop for removal, and then Goliath being one of our mainstay and standard draw engines. And then we have some of the strongest songs in the game, I would argue, with Thunderbolt just doing 4 damage to a character, Strength being inkable and being able to do character damage to a character based on your total characters. So this can be 1 damage, this can be 7 damage. And then Let It Go, which is just a delete button, right? You take a character, you put it in their opponent's ink while it's gone. So, and that was reprinted this set. Your late game will typically feature your bombs, right? You have Hades, who when you play him, you ink an opponent's character. Vincenzo, that does 3 damage on play, quest for 3. Arthur, King Victorious, when you play him, you give a character challenger +2, resist +2, and they can challenge readied characters, which is very strong and very cool. And then things like Headless Horseman, who was released in set 10, was kind of featured in a whole bunch of builds and then kind of lost favor as the set went on. But you do a really chaotic Witching Hour, draw 3, discard 3. Hopefully there's a couple actions in there and you're pinging some damage. And then the new Darkwing Duck, Cool Under Pressure, which is the other new Steel Legendary that allows you to challenge villain characters, right? So he can challenge readied villain characters, which is a fun little new tech option. And then Beyond the Horizon, which is a form of draw and disruption, right? So you can sing together 7. Sing together means that you can use multiple characters to sing, or you can just use one. And then, both players, either one, the opponent, or both players will discard their hand and draw 3. So you get to pick. So what are some deck styles that we'll be kind of, talking about today? So I've split it up. There's going to be 15 total lists. The first 5 will be pretty meta builds. Meta meaning that these are designed to be competitive. These are designed to go toe-to-toe with some of the other most competitive builds that are going to be out there. Hopefully these are builds that would get you a set champs win and maybe even like win a big premier tournament like a PPG or like a Disney Lorcana challenge. So the number 1 build that I'm going to talk about today, or kind of showcase, right, is going to be Sonic Boom. This is going to be my main build for now to at least start the set, and this is going to be the build I'm going to be putting the most work in and testing the most, right? So this is a 2-4-6 ramp line build that puts a strong emphasis on getting the most value out of Ariel, who allows you to do 3 extra damage by paying 2 ink every time you play a song, and that's extremely relevant. So Princess Ramp is essentially similar to Sonic Boom in that like it's kind of your more very like kind of cookie cutter 2-4-6 with Cinderella, and then using strong Steel and Sapphire Princesses to kind of keep gaining that value while establishing strong relevant bodies, and then your top end of Hades and Vincenzo's and things. So it's designed to be a little bit more consistent. Jasmine Allies, right, which uses your Jasmine, you find allies and you play value. Right, Kiwi Birds, which is a unique form of aggro deck, and then Darkwing Detectives, right? So we're kind of evolving the Detectives deck from last set and really trying to put a little bit more emphasis on what does Darkwing contribute here and how does he play a role. So some of the less meta builds that we will cover are going to be Rat Behavior, which is a ramp build that utilizes Ward, Ocean Waves, Witching Boom, Seeing Blue, Arabian Ducks. Seeing Blue is a 3-5-7 ramp build. Arabian Ducks is another form of allies. And then we're going to talk about some very off-meta builds today, and so just, again, these are just showcases. These are not full-fledged deck profiles. Many of these builds are going to get deck profiles in set 11. That's at least my goal, right? So I would almost guarantee that we're going to do one on Darkwing Detectives and Sonic Boom. But, I'm hoping to also give like Jasmine Allies and Rat Behavior ones as well. And so we'll see. So off meta, right? So Boost Mobile is utilizing the new Tamatoa that gains lore off of cards that get boosted, right? Or cards being put under them as one of the new mechanics that was introduced in set 10. Very fun, very unique build. Honest Counsel is another form of aggro build that uses the hero archetype to gain lore. Darkwing's Workshop, so this is an items build, right? With a strong emphasis on trying to use item loops for value. Locations, this is a build that uses locations to gain lore and utilizes John Silver to kind of be a very strong closer in regards to questing for big numbers with the locations. And then Grand Pabbie. So I love Grand Pabbie. Such a cool character. He is a card that every time you heal a character, every time you heal heal a damage point, right? Remove a damage counter, you gain 2 lore. And so he just he can explosively burst with lore. He's just really hard to make work, but I think we might have found a list to at least give him a chance. So that's kind of the early platter. So let's kind of dive into some of these lists, right? And so I would encourage you, when we get to the list, you can pause, you can kind of rebuild it yourself in Dreamborn. You can also go to the description in the YouTube, and a link to my Dreamborn is there. All of my lists are public, and so you can kind of just copy, duplicate it, make it your own, however that looks. I would just ask that if you do make a better version of my deck, let me know, right? I'd love to see that. I'd love to see the community kind of, take something and just make something beautiful out of it. So the first build that we'll kind of showcase here is Sonic Boom, right? This has gone through a lot of testing to get it in kind of the starting version of it for set 11 Winterspell. And so this is a deck that really tries to eke out the highest amount of value every turn, and uses Aerial Sonic Warrior as sort of the heart and soul of its control and value, right? So you're really trying to like set up an engine where singing songs not only like removes characters, right, but really like allows you to kind of swing so many boards in your favor, right? And so, for example, you could sing Down in New Orleans, get a free Goliath, and pay 2 to do 3 damage. You could sing Mob Song. You could do 3 damage to 4 characters if you have an aerial on board, right? You could pay 2 extra ink to do 3 more damage. And so, but it's not like fully reliant on aerial. There's a lot of other ways to kind of set up and do your lines. For set 10, I released a 90-minute video kind of diving deep into this build. So, if you are super interested, I would check that out. Most of it still applies here. The set 11 build, the big changes is that we don't have a secondary follow-up ramp, right? What I mean by that is that, you play Tipo, you play Sail. Cinderella is your ramp option now. Kita's gone. Maybe she comes back. But right now we're testing and utilizing Angel as an alternate 4-cost character that gives you a really strong answer to aggro builds, especially green-yellow builds, while you are on the draw, right? While you go second. And has really allowed you to win some games that were effectively unwinnable historically. She does force a slower game. You play a 5-cost and then a 6-cost and a 7-cost after that. But that's okay if you're able to sort of stabilize and be able to set that up. Moana is the other kind of Moana is one of the other new major additions to the build, and Moana's crazy. I love Moana. She's a card I'm so excited about to be able to like ink from the discard. She's a princess, so she triggers Cinderella. She opens up like so many new openings and lines and like value engines. To really talking about Moana is its own video. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on it right here. But Moana is an option. I'm really excited to see, where she takes the build. And, I think she really opens up a lot for the build. So most of the song selection is kind of the same. The big thing is that we get Let It Go now, which is a kind of a new delete button. So we've gone down on our I'm Much Faster count, right? We used to run 3, now we run 2. We used to run 3 Beyond the Horizons, now we run 2. And then we've gone up on our Let It Go to 2. Now, there is a world where we may go up to 3. I definitely don't think we need more than 3. I think running 4 is excessive and was usually just ink for at least 2 of those. 2 feels like the right number where, you want to draw it when you need it, but it's not always like the early removal you want to do. It does ramp your opponent, and, you want to be kind of a little bit more wise about what you decide to use Let It Go on. And so 2 feels like the right number, but I could see a world easily where we bump it up to 3. And then our typical top end, as you see here. So there's a strong emphasis on removal, tech, and versatility, right? So it's really designed to kind of handle almost any problem you'd run into, which is why I love playing it. And it's so fun and satisfying to play with that kind of like heart and soul in mind. So this is Princess Ramp, which is kind of like a more like watered down version of Sonic Boom, right? It's not to say that it's like worse because of that, but it's just it's a ramp build whose kind of like emphasis is consistency, right? You want to see your lines, and when you do see those lines, you kind of know what to expect. You want to be able to very powerfully do the same but powerful game plan most games. So, there's a higher Let It Go count because of that. And then, there's a little bit more like lower cost characters like Belle, etc., to sort of account for that. Now, there are less tech things in the build, right? You don't have item hate, so there's no Pluto here. You don't have really things to deal with super wide boards like the Mob Song. So these are just kind of accepted weaknesses. But both builds have very valid strengths and weaknesses. Jasmine Allies. So this is a very different ramp style to play, right? So Jasmine Allies gives you, basically the biggest advantage of Jasmine Allies is that it gives you a play on turns 1, 2, and 3 that historically are kind of just like dead turns for many ramp builds, right? You don't really care what you do turn 1 most games. If you're playing against aggro, maybe you play your 1-drops, but many times you just ink and pass. And then turn 2, you live and die by finding your turn 2 ramp, like Tapo or Sail. If you sort of miss those, you're just really hoping your opponent has a bad hand too, because many of those games you sort of just end up losing because you have really no other turn 2 plays, and then you really have no turn 3 plays, like almost none, if none at all. And so because your game sort of starts when you play your 4-cost character. So but the Jasmine ally builds allow completely different openings, right? You can shift Jasmine on 2 and then start questing and finding allies. And then you can play Pleakley on 3, which then allows you to ink that Jasmine, which shoots you up to 5 or 6 ink. So, but then you still have access to like the normal standardized ramp approach, right? You could still play Tipo, you can still play Sail, and then play Cinderella afterwards, etc., etc. So these, have lots of really great consistency and lots of different ways to maintain card advantage. But they, lack some of the like overwhelming removal and kind of like diversity and versatility that some of the aerial builds may have. So here we have a Kiwi aggro list, right? So this is an aggro build that utilizes ward and bodyguard to kind of close games, and puts a strong emphasis on making a very disruptive, really like kind of tough board for your opponent to deal with while you're shooting for that 20 lore count, right? So it is an aggro build, so it's meant to quest pretty fast. It does a good job of that. And the really kind of big claim to fame is that, it's like the only aggro build that's utilizing ward consistently and obnoxiously, right? You can like have like 3+ characters warded on your board, which means they can't be selected for removal like with songs. But then when you combine ward with bodyguard, suddenly like you have really big defenders for all your questers that you were hoping to challenge, but now you can't because of bodyguard. And when the bodyguard has ward, you can't even like just delete it or get rid of it with an action or song. You have to still like just fight through it, right? Which oftentimes gives Kiwi the time that it needs to just close the game and win. So this is Darkwing Detectives. So this is going to be the first version of my new detectives list. Of course, like all of these lists are liable to change, but this is like the starting point. Some of the biggest changes, obviously, is we get like a lot of the new Darkwing cards, which are all detectives. We get a new 1-cost character, the Darkwing Duck Crime Fighter 2/2. We get a really interesting new 2-cost character, which is a 4/1 with Ward. And then, the new Steel Legendary. Now, he also has access to other interesting features like the Thunderquack, which is an item that makes all opponents villains, which means he can ready anything they have because he can challenge readied villains. So Thunderquack opens up that option. And then there's Darkwing Tower, which sort of, replaces Castle Wyvern in the previous build. But, it's an 8 willpower location that gains lore. But more importantly, characters that are here, if you banish a villain character, they re-ready. So it sets up a very fascinating, super high roll play or a way to close a game with Darkwing, right? Like if you maybe keep one of his shift targets chilling at the location, and you could shift onto them at any time and use Darkwing to almost clear an opponent's board. Now, because he can challenge villain characters, and if you have a Thunderquack on board, then you can. All characters are villain characters, and if you're at the tower, you keep re-readying every time you kill a villain character. Now, that's made even stronger if you have a Nick Wilde or Judy Hopps already on board, right? Because that gives them resist, that gives them like you're drawing every time you banish something, and so for now, right, we're keeping that really cool line that we're able to achieve, but we don't like rely on it. So you still play this like a pretty normal detectives build up to like 6 or 7 ink. So ramp behavior, right? So this is a ramp build that utilizes ward characters and lots of endgame bombs to kind of close game and fight for the board. The ward characters, so it uses a 2-4-5-7 ramp line with Kita, right? And a 2-4-6 line with Pleakley. So you're able to do both things, right? Either play like a slightly slower but very efficient 7-drop, or play a very fast 6-drop. And this build is just very annoying for many builds, right? Because you know, you have big characters with ward that they just have to fight through now, and fighting through a warded bodyguard is very tough. And then you know, having to deal with a Radigan, a 6/7 quest for 4 with ward, you know, that's extremely tough. And you know, for many decks, they've will only get 1 or 2 turns to answer that before you win the game. So I very much enjoy this build. It's on the cheaper side as well, but I think it's honestly one of the more competitive builds that we have in this section. So Ocean Waves, this is definitely a super Omega Spice build. It, you know, the concept behind Ocean Waves is you are gaining tons of value every time you ink, right? So, you know, Mama Odie allows you to ink the top card off the top of your deck into ink while exerted every time you sing a song, right? And Jafar, Power Hungry Vizier from set 6, allows you to, actually forces you to, you ping 1 damage on a character for every time you ink this turn. So you can kind of already see the vision there, right? And the deck runs like 22 plus songs. And so if you have Odies on board, suddenly like you're singing a song, you're maybe like removing something with strength, then you're inking off the top of the deck with Mama Odie, which means that you've inked an additional time. So Jafar pings an extra damage. So the more you sing, the more you ink with Odie's effect, the more you ping with Jafar. And if you have Cheech on board, if you inked the second time on your turn, you draw a card, right? So you're singing, you're inking, you're drawing, you're pinging. And so this is kind of like the very fun relationship. It runs a ludicrously high uninkable count. It's like, I think it's like 27 or 26, something like that. But it does it with a breeze, right? And we get to try the new Grammatala here because it gets to very large ink counts very fast. And, you know, which means all of these Grammatalas, her cost is reduced for every ink you have, will likely become free. So that's kind of like an interesting follow-up plan. And she can sing any song. So she can sing a Dig a Little Deeper by herself. Pretty cool. Very fun. It's a very complex build. It's very technical. And if you know, it's a little hard to learn, but if you learn it, you know, you'll have a blast. Witching Boom. So this is a pretty conventional ramp build that utilizes the horseman, right? The headless horseman as the kind of like the top end, which means it's a little bit more action heavy. Because if you want his witching hour to do more damage, you want to be discarding actions. So it's running spooky sites as a way to kind of deal with aggro. It's running, you know, yeah, to kind of help like supplement the, you know, the need for more actions. So here you could probably take out aerials and put in like develop your brains and such, but you know, I always like to have slightly more options. And plus it's called Witching Boom, right? Like Sonic Boom. So this is sort of like a aerial Headless Horseman mix, and is meant to be one of the better answers into a deck like Blue-Green, for example. Seeing Blue, so this is a 3/5/7 ramp build, right? So it is designed to ramp on 3. You know, it has Chicha as an accessible draw engine on 2, right? And then you just keep playing cards at ink when you play them, right? So you play Chicha on 2, you play Mickey on 3, you draw a card. You play Donald on 5, you draw a card, right? And so, which then allows you normally to have a pretty healthy hand by that point, and you're just deploying big major threats, right? Tinkerbells, Hadeses, etc. So it's pretty fun. It's a little less consistent, right, than your 2/4/6 builds, but I still quite enjoy this build. So Arabian Ducks is a form of allies that uses the legendary Scar from set 9 Fabled, Finally King. So Scar gives all allies +1 strength, and when he quests, or sorry, when he's exerted at the end of the turn, usually from questing or challenging, you can banish an ally and draw equal to its strength, and then discard 2. So this deck has tons of support. So for example, if you have like a Tipo on the board and you have Dewey quest and support 2 strength, and then you have Louis quest support 3 strength, etc., etc., eventually you could make that Tipo like 9 or 10 strength. You pop that Tipo with Scar, you're drawing 10 cards, right? Pretty cool. Pretty cool. This was actually a pretty strong deck back in set 9. It's a little clunkier right now just because there's a lot more decks that have more options on dealing with its plan, but I still think it's a very, very cost-effective, it's a very cheap deck. It's a very cost-effective way to play with Sapphire Steel that I think still has lots of credibility and ways to win. So now we're going to get into some pretty spicy decks, right? So this is Boost Mobile. This uses a lot of the new boost cards. Boosting is when you take cards that have the boost ability. Means you pay a certain amount of ink, and then you can take the top card from your deck and you put it underneath the card to activate an ability usually. So there's a lot of cards that also just take cards off the top of the deck and put them under cards. It's technically not a boost. Everyone's going to call it a boost. Boosting is specifically paying ink to do the same thing off the character's ability. But there's a lot of ways to get cards now from the top of the deck underneath the character. And if you're able to do that, there's a lot of cards that gain value from that. For example, this new Tamatoa, Seeker of Shine, whenever you put a card underneath another card this turn, he gains 1 lore. And that's not like cards that are put under him. It's any card put under any card this turn. Now that does, put a weird qualifier in that, like, it doesn't carry over, right? So you can't set him up doing that the next turn, right? It has to be the turn that the cards are put under the characters. And so, but he can be very explosive in his ability to close the game because of that. And similarly, Morty Fieldmouse gets +1 lore for each card that's put under him. And, once per turn, whenever you put a card under one of your other characters, right, you can put a card underneath Morty, right? So basically, when you boost others, you're boosting him, and he gains 1 lore per boosted card under him. So pretty cool, pretty fun build. It's very, very unique, and I encourage anyone to give it a try. This was inspired by one of my good friends, Sevi, in the Sapphire Steel community. So there's Anna's Council. So again, this is an aggro build that utilizes Anna Truehearted. She's the forecast there. When she quests, all your other heroes get +1 lore for this turn. So, she could just kind of close games immediately, right, if gone unanswered. It plays very similar to Kiwi, right? You still have your Alices, you still have your bodyguards, but there's just not as much commitment to that very specific opening, right? So you have a little bit more diversity in regards to how you want to approach questing. But I will say I think the Kiwis is overall much stronger. So Darkwing's Workshop, right? So this is an items build that seeks to gain value through a lot of the item loops you may see in the game, right? So a lot of these, so like Belle's favorite book, when you exert it, you banish an item. Ink Amplifier, when your opponent draws more than 2 or more cards, you can ink 1 card on your turn, right? So then you have cards that are easily repeatable. So you have Jumbo Pop, where you just banish it, you draw 1 card, and then you can heal 2 off every character. Ingenious Device, right? When it's banished, you can do 3 damage. And then Robot Queen, whenever you play a character, you pay 1 ink to deal 2 more damage to another character. So you can recycle these with Prince John and Merlin's Carpetbag. Now you may notice that I don't have the 6-cost Tamatoa in this build. I think he definitely could fit in a build like this. It already feels kind of tight, and it already feels like you have to have a whole bunch of other really weird options for your items to even halfway work. But it does work. It's clunky and it's challenging. It's definitely not what items used to be. But if you're able to get your setup right with Oswald, with Prince John, with Mrs. Potts, etc., then the loops that you can perform are quite powerful, especially with Ingenious Device, by endlessly recycling that. So locations. So this is an extremely spicy build that, the goal of this build is to, don't run dry with your hand early, ramp to 6, and you're kind of comfortable just sort of stopping the game at 6. And then, you're playing 6-cost characters, and then you're singing Down in New Orleans, which can play, the top 3 cards. You look at the top 3 cards of your deck. If there's a 6-cost character, location, or item, you can play that for free, right? And so, you're playing ideally Treasure Mountains for free, which, it's a 9 willpower location that gains 2 lore per turn. And, you're playing the new Winterspell card, which gives, a character the ability to not be challenged until you start your next turn, and you're drawing a card after doing that. And then, of course, John Silver, Greedy Treasure Seeker, so much fun, where he gains 1 lore and 1 resist for every location you have on the field, right? So he could quest for 1, he could quest for 4. He could be immortal, maybe he dies early, right? So very fun, very spicy build. And then this is our beloved Grand Pabbie 1-turn kill. Basically, the idea is that you play this uses the Sonic Boom shell, right? To then be able, or like the Princess Ramp shell, right? and then you use that to kind of have some safety control removal engines already established so you could actually do your Pabbie combo. And the cool thing is that like cards like Robin Hood or Ariel or the Steel Songs, you can ping damage onto your own characters instead. Like you can shoot a song on your own character to get damage on them. And so then you could, using that, set up a big heal, right, with Piglet, Cocoa Maker, or Ever As Before, and, you know, performing that healing function for every heal, you know, off a individual character, you gain 2 lore. So with Pabbie, you know, if you set it up right, you could gain 10 to 20 lore in one turn, right? So very, very powerful. That's with one Pabbie. If you have multiple Pabbie, you kind of just win the game. The hard part is like getting him established and not having him immediately get removed or punished right after. So this is why the deck's trying to design around, you know, even the turn you play him, right, you can get massive benefit. So the other cool thing about Sapphire Steel is that we just have such an awesome community, man. I tell you, you know, it's very active. It's been very active. It's very passionate. A lot of these people have become really good friends. They see, you know, there's lots of meetups at the Disney Lorcana challenges, etc., etc. And so, you know, you can catch a lot of the familiar faces in the Lore 20 Discord or the general Lorcana Discord. There's people on Twitch, primarily me as streamers of Blue Steel. And then there's a lot of faces on YouTube and X and Twitter. Some of the faces that you may see on YouTube are Harlan Sweet, you know, Hector through 24K Lorcana, Rip Lungs on also known as Cray 8, right? Jeff from Additional Ink, and then of course moi, Malferon, who, you know, my numbers aren't quite their numbers, but these are some kind of older Vanguard veterans in the space that have really done a lot for the color combo of Sapphire Steel and have shown it a lot of love. So in conclusion, right, Sapphire Steel, I think it's strong. I think it's relevant, right? Well, I always think it's strong and I always think it's relevant. But you know, it's a very, very satisfying to play. There's a variety of play styles that I hope I got to show off today, right? And let me kind of re-emphasize that many of these lists, especially the ones I plan to very seriously test to try to be as competitive as possible, like especially in that initial 5, are liable to change, right? As the set goes on, you get a better idea of what the meta looks like, et cetera, if you want to play competitively. But, you know, even just playing to have a fun strategy come together, to win in a unique way, to approach a meta from a different angle, right? Like, you know, perhaps that boost mobile deck really shoots off and becomes something that's as a major threat. Perhaps this is the set that items really does pop off, right? Perhaps my build was nowhere near what that final build will look like. That's all stuff I just want to put out there is very, very likely, right? That many of these lists are liable to change. That doesn't mean, you know, that doesn't mean that they were wrong to begin with, but just that, you know, we learn as the set goes on and on. So if you want to follow along with those specific lists, right, I would just encourage you to follow my Dreamborn and you can kind of see where the changes go from there. Many of the top builds have pretty reasonable costs. The most expensive card is going to be your Cinderellas, right? Which is averaging, like as of this video, like $25 to $30. And so, however, the entry level compared to like Amethyst decks, right? You know, many of those like purple legendaries on average go for like, you know, 25 to 30. Dumbo stretches somewhere between like 30 to 45 sometimes. And so, and you need like 4 copies of all of them. So, you know, I'd say the general investment for Sapphire Steel feels more user-friendly than most, especially when you think of decks like Rat Behavior, Detectives, Boost Mobile, right? These are all decks that have very, very affordable prices. And so, and then, as I said, the community is just awesome, right? And so you get to meet a lot of fun faces, and everyone's very helpful. Like, you know, people in Sapphire Steel want others to enjoy and play Sapphire Steel because it's just the best. So I hope this video kind of showcased, you know, like why you would want to play Sapphire Steel, kind of gave some tips on, you know, how to kind of put a Sapphire Steel deck together and to kind of grow in your understanding of playing Sapphire Steel successfully, and kind of, you know, got to showcase some fun, cool stuff, right? Hope you guys give it a shot, check it out. If you do make a Sapphire Steel build, put a comment about it in the video, right? You know, I'd love to hear what you're doing, share your lists, and, you know, if you are wanting to kind of get more introduced to the community, I really encourage you to check out the stream, right? Our stream has a lot of people in the Sapphire Steel community, and we just, want to see that grow. And so if you enjoy the video, please consider giving it a like, a subscribe, and sharing it, right? This really kind of helps spread the word. And, hope you guys had a good time. Take it easy out there. You know how it is. May you be blessed.